The world's oceans are vast, unforgiving, and shrouded in mystery. For centuries, sailors and explorers have ventured into the unknown, only to return with tales of the strange and unexplainable. Among these stories, few are as chilling as those of ghost ships. Vessels found adrift, their crews mysteriously vanished or frozen in time. Some exist only in legend, like the cursed Flying Dutchman, forever doomed to sail the seas. But others are all too real. Throughout history, ships have been discovered aimlessly drifting, their crews mysteriously vanished, or worse, found lifeless under eerie and unexplained circumstances. One of the most famous cases is the Mary Celeste, discovered abandoned in the Atlantic Ocean with no sign of struggle, no trace of its crew, and no definitive explanation to this day. But some ghost ship stories are more chilling than others, so haunting they linger in the minds of sailors like a waking nightmare. And none is as terrifying as the legend of Octavius, the ship that became a tomb of ice, lost in time. The story begins in 1761, when the Octavius, a proud and sturdy merchant vessel, docked in London to take on cargo bound for China. Aboard were its experienced crew, a determined captain and his wife and young son, ready to brave the long voyage ahead. The journey east was uneventful, and after more than a year at sea, Octavius arrived safely in China. The ship was unloaded, resupplied, and prepared for the long return voyage to England. But this was where the captain made a fateful decision, one that would seal the ship's place in maritime legend. The weather was unusually warm, and instead of retracing their route around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, the captain chose to attempt something no ship had ever accomplished: navigating the Northwest Passage. This treacherous Arctic route, winding through the icy waters of northern Canada, promised a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific. If successful, it would mean a faster journey home, an achievement that would cement the captain's name in history. With fair winds and clear skies, he decided it was worth the risk. At first, the voyage through the Northwest Passage seemed promising. The crew of Octavius sailed northward, leaving behind the warmer waters of the Pacific and entering the Arctic. The wind was steady, and the seas were eerily calm. Spirits were high. The possibility of making history filled the sailors with excitement. But the Arctic is unforgiving. As they ventured deeper into the passage, the temperature plummeted. The once open waters began to narrow, jagged ice floes creeping in from all sides. The winds that had once been their ally now turned bitter, slicing through the ship's rigging like knives. Then, the ice closed in. With no warning, a sudden cold snap gripped the region, locking Octavius in a frozen vice. The crew scrambled to free the ship, but it was hopeless. Ice built up along the hull, creaking ominously as the ship groaned under the pressure. Within days, they were completely trapped. The ship was now at the mercy of the Arctic's cruel embrace. Weeks passed, then months. The endless daylight of the Arctic summer faded into the long, unrelenting darkness of winter. Supplies dwindled, the cold seeped into the very bones of the ship, making sleep near impossible. The men, once hopeful, now moved sluggishly, their breath visible in the frigid air. One by one, they began to succumb to hunger, to cold, to sheer despair. Some likely perished in their bunks, wrapped in thin blankets that could do nothing against the bitter freeze. Others may have held on longer, clinging to the hope that the ice would break, that the wind would return, that they would somehow escape their frozen tomb. But the Arctic is merciless. And so the Octavius drifted. With no living hands to steer her, the ship became a prisoner of the ice, carried wherever the currents wheeled. For years, it remained trapped, adrift in a world of endless white, a silent graveyard beneath the northern lights. Then, in 1775, 13 years after Octavius had last been seen, fate intervened. On October 11, 1775, in the vast and frigid waters west of Greenland, the whaling ship Herald braved the bitter cold, scouring the Labrador Sea for one final catch before the encroaching Arctic ice made further hunting impossible. The day was cloaked in a thick October mist. Gray clouds smothered the sky, and frigid waves crashed over the deck. The captain of Herald, anxious for success before turning south, remained focused on the hunt until a cry from the crow's nest shattered the monotony. It was not a whale. A ship loomed through the fog, drifting aimlessly from the north. At first, the captain assumed it was another whaler lost in the mist. But as they drew closer, unease gripped the crew. Something was wrong. The three-masted schooner was in a pitiful state. Its sails were shredded and hung limp from the masts. The rigging was tattered, snapping in the wind like old cobwebs. The hull, though largely intact, bore the scars of countless storms. Ice glazed the deck, and there was no movement, no crew, no sign of life. The Herald's mate called out, his voice swallowed by the silence. English, then French, Dutch, German, Spanish. Still nothing. The only response was the eerie groan of wood shifting beneath the ice. Then, as the Herald drew alongside, the name on the ship's stern became visible. Octavius. The captain's mind raced. A merchant ship, adrift without its crew, meant a mystery and possibly a fortune. A salvage operation was swiftly arranged. 5 men, including the first mate, lowered a cutter and rowed toward the derelict vessel, their breaths visible in the freezing air. As they climbed aboard the ship, silence felt suffocating. The deck was slick with ice, and every footstep echoed ominously. No crew greeted them, no movement. The ship was an empty husk. The first mate led the search. The deck was deserted, but below, in the dim and frozen corridors, the true horror awaited. The first body was found near the hatch, a sailor, frozen solid, his face twisted in an expression of silent agony. His eyes, wide open, seemed to stare through the intruders. Then more. The lower decks were filled with the dead, men who had perished where they sat, some still clutching tools, others wrapped in threadbare blankets. Hammocks sagged under the weight of frozen corpses, locked in an eternal, undisturbed sleep. But the worst discovery lay ahead. The first mate hesitated at the door of the captain's quarters, his breath shallow. Slowly, he pushed it open. Inside, the captain of the Octavius sat at his desk, his lifeless hands still clutching a quill. His hollow eyes stared into the void, as if death had taken him mid-sentence. Beside him, wrapped in blankets, lay the bodies of a woman and a child, his wife and son frozen together in their final moments. A crewman sat nearby, a tinderbox in his stiff hands, as though he had been trying in vain to light a fire. The room was undisturbed, as if time itself had frozen along with the bodies. The Herald's men could take no more. The ship felt cursed, as if death still lingered in the air. Before they fled, the mate pried a leather-bound logbook from the captain's icy grip. It crumbled at the edges, half frozen, the ink smeared. Only the first and last pages remained legible. The men scrambled back to their boat, rowing frantically as if something unseen pursued them. None of them wished to speak of what they had found. Some whispered of scuttling the ship, sending it to the depths where it belonged. But fear kept them from boarding it again. The Herald's captain was shaken by the tale, ordered them to leave the ghost ship to the sea. They watched in silence as the Octavius disappeared into the mist, never to be seen again. That night, the remaining pages of the logbook were studied. The ship had set sail from London in 1761, 13 years earlier, after delivering its cargo to China. The captain had made the ill-fated decision to return to England via the Northwest Passage. The entries described the journey north, the optimism of the crew as they ventured into the Arctic. But as the days passed, the tone darkened. Ice closed in. The ship became trapped, unable to break free. The final entry, dated November 11, 1762, marked their position, 75 degrees north, 160 degrees west, far beyond the northernmost. That position placed them deep in the Arctic Ocean, near what is now Point Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost point of the United States. They had been frozen in the Arctic for over a decade, drifting with unseen currents, locked in an icy limbo. The Octavius had long since become a tomb, carrying its dead crew across the seas. And then, as if guided by some spectral force, it had finally emerged from its frozen purgatory, only to be abandoned once more. No one knows what became of the Octavius after that day. Some say it still drifts, a phantom ship lost to time, appearing only to those doomed to meet a similar fate. The Arctic does not give back its dead. As the Herald sailed southward, leaving the spectral ship behind, the men who had set foot aboard the Octavius struggled to shake off a sense of dread. Even as the whaling vessel returned to friendlier waters, none of them could forget the sight of that frozen crew, locked in eerie stillness, as if death itself had caught them by surprise. The logbook, the only tangible clue to the doomed journey of Octavius, was studied further. What few remaining entries could be salvaged hinted at their final days' descriptions of dwindling food, a relentless and unyielding cold, and desperate attempts to free the ship from the ice. But there was no mention of a mutiny, no record of panic, no final desperate cry scrawled across the pages. Just a slow, silent descent into an icy oblivion. The manner in which the crew perished remains one of the most chilling aspects of the story. Unlike those lost in shipwrecks, whose final moments are consumed by chaos and crashing waves, the men of the Octavius succumbed to something far crueler: hypothermia. But in the Arctic, death is not the end. The extreme cold would have preserved their bodies almost perfectly, with no scavengers to disturb them and the frigid air preventing decomposition. The Octavius became a floating tomb, its crew locked in time for 13 years. Their faces remain frozen in their final expressions, some of determination, some of fear, some simply appearing asleep. After the Herald sighted and abandoned the Octavius in 1775, it was never seen again. If the ship continued to drift south, it may have eventually succumbed to the forces of nature. Its wooden hull, weakened by time, could have been swallowed by the sea. Or perhaps it became trapped in the ice once more, sealing it away in a frozen grave, waiting to be uncovered centuries later. Could the wreck of the Octavius still exist today? Arctic explorers and maritime archaeologists have never discovered its remains. But in a region where ice shifts unpredictably and secrets lie buried beneath layers of permafrost, anything is possible. Real or legend, the Octavius remains one of the most haunting maritime stories ever told. A ghost ship lost to ice and time, showing how nature can swallow even the bravest without a trace. The Northwest Passage was not successfully navigated until the early 20th century. Yet this ill-fated ship may have done it over a century earlier, only to pay the ultimate price. But the most terrifying part: the Octavius was found 13 years after it disappeared, which means for over a decade, it had been drifting silently through the Arctic, crewed only by the dead. And perhaps, just perhaps, it still is. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic adventure stories. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.